Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Gay with God podcast. I'm Midge Noble, your host, and we have a returning guest, Kalie Hargrove. She is a writer, theologian, ordained minister, and director of digital outreach for the Center for Prophetic Imagination. She lives in the greater Atlanta area with her partner and 2 kids. Kalie has been part of the LGBTQ plus activism, bringing awareness of the legalized discrimination queer and trans students face at religious universities. She received her Master of Divinity, emphasizing in biblical studies from United Theological Seminary of Twin Cities. And Kalie, welcome back to the Gay with God podcast.
Well, thank you for having me back.
I'm so excited. And I had dinner with a dear Facebook friend who's very connected to the podcast and to the Faith Journey group. And he said to me just yesterday, I loved that interview with Kalie. And when you said you were bringing her back, I was like, thank goodness, because I wanted her back. So I'm like, well, just wait. She's back. So I am so excited. And one of the things that felt incomplete to me last time is that we talked about everything that brought you to who you are now and what's going on now. And you had one little quick phrase in there, and you said, it said, well, that's when my egg cracked. You talked about that's when trans people recognize who they are. And then we moved on. And you said, and there's a story behind that. And I'm like, well, that's the story I now need to hear. And I know you and I just spoke briefly, and there are certain things about that you can't share with respect to everybody involved. Please go in there a little bit. And then I think what we're going to do after we can kind of clear this up for Midge, then we're going to talk more today about affirmation and solidarity and how churches are set up and why it's not always helpful for us. So please, Kalie, educate Midge and tell me about this egg cracking.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, the term egg cracking means whenever a trans person realizes that they're trans. That's literally all it means. And you'll see it like on social media and stuff. But yeah, for me, realizing I was trans came after like a really long time of I think last time I said it's not deconstruction, it's just learning and growing. And during that time, like accepting trans people was like the absolute last step on that process, because like at first it was like it was one thing to realize that certain aspects of evangelicalism is really kind of messed up. Like there was a family member who had a lot of like health issues and basically went from like being a relatively like normal adult person with like a kid and was married, and she had some health things that happened, but she lived, but she came out of it with a lot of long-term damage, and like her quality of life is no longer what it was. And so like it kind of struck me really weird that all of these like evangelical, like really faithful people were looking at that and be like, praise God that she lived. And it's just like, I mean, I'm not saying that I wish that she had died, but like there is in fact this disconnect between what people believe or what people say they believe and what people actually believe. Because like in an evangelical understanding, she can no longer take care of herself. She needs to have a caretaker. She can't really be a parent to her kid. In like an evangelical framework, like dying is actually the better, right? Like the point is to in fact die and go somewhere else where it's better, right? And it's just like there's this disconnect between like praising God for somebody living, even though it puts them in a lower like quality of life. And it just like, to me, it didn't line up. So that was like something that I really struggled with. This can be a very long way to answer your question, but
That's okay.
it's more details about like different things that I like had to work through and question. And like that opened up like this question of, if you're an evangelical parent and you believe in eternal conscious torment, like what's the over under percentage of taking that bet of like, if you have 3 kids, there's a there's a good chance at least one of them isn't going to stay Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're risking the creation of children for the possibility that they might go to heaven, but at the same time they might go to hell. Like, what's the over under here for it being an ethical choice to have children within an evangelical framework? Like, just some of these things started to really break down on like these fundamental like understandings and disconnects in theology as opposed to real world application, and like recognizing the fact that we have like the social structure within evangelicalism that has taught us to think of different things in certain ways, that even like it doesn't matter if it lines up theologically or not, because it's within the like the world that we live in, we just accept it as truth. That really struck home with things like homosexuality, because I started to look at like what the Bible says about homosexuality, and it honestly doesn't. What the Bible says isn't what evangelicals say it says. If you study it,
Mm-hmm.
like at best that you can come away with is ambiguity of what the Bible says on homosexuality. Like that's at best, honestly. But then the only thing that's really pushing people to say that homosexuality is a sin or not a sin really comes down to whether or not they want to uphold their cultural tradition, and their their theology really has no basis. Its basis is more in culture than in actual biblical study, which is that first step that I took to become affirming, is recognizing that cultural implications to how we live actually determines our theology more than like the Bible determines our theology. And so yeah, like that was the first like step for me in becoming affirming. I was still super reserved about trans people, because the percentage wise trans people, there's not as many trans people as there are like bisexual people. And honestly, there's probably more bisexual people than statistics say, because those are based off surveys, and surveys are
Mm-hmm.
based off people that have ideologies, right? Like
Well, and
I
it's
have a theory.
and surveys are based on whether or not people are telling the truth
Yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
how many fill them out. And
Yeah. So like I have a theory that most people are at minimum bisexual for the most part. It might not be true, but that's my theory.
you're allowed
Uh
to have one.
yeah. So like I actually think that it's a minority of people that are that are straight, like just straight people.
Straight.
Like
Yeah,
yeah,
without
straight.
any other,
Whatever.
without any yearnings
Yeah.
or leanings or. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the number, like especially with, because men are the most reserved for some reason. It's more culturally acceptable for women to be into women than men to be into men. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. It's weird.
It's an
Um
ego thing, I think.
yeah, probably. Um but you can't like, I think even some of the most like I don't know, like culturally manly men, I think probably have more bisexual leanings than they would they would like to lead on.
Oh.
But yeah, sorry, that was a rabbit trail right there. Um, but yeah, I mean, it does come down to the fact that we do have a cultural understanding of gender and sexuality that in fact informs our theology, and not the other way around. And that's just something that we have to deal with,
Mhm.
and actually work through, because that's gonna that's gonna affect so many areas of our life. Recognizing where things come from culture as opposed to where things come from actual understanding. But like gender was a little bit different, because like whenever we only have like a basic understanding of gender, and did I share last time I was on this, like my seventh grade biology teacher taught us that men and women had different number of ribs.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I wasn't getting the most gender expansive education, not even scientifically accurate, because that's not true. Humans have the same number of ribs regardless of the genitals that they're born with. So like my understanding wasn't even a qualified like seventh grade biology level of understanding of gender, right? That's where we were at. And so like there's definitely like a knowledge gap there to really kind of start to question gender. And because I still had this like understanding, like kindergarten cop has boys have penises, girls have vaginas, like that's it. um like it really breaks down whenever you look at it, because intersex people exist, right? Like
Right.
they just do. And there's this understanding that intersex exists because of a broken nature, because of the fall, which if you hold that theology, please stop it, because that's uh it's actually erasure of intersex people. It's I don't know if intersex phobic is a word, but it should be.
Hmm.
Like intersex people are actually part of nature. It like they are who they are, and that
Right.
is who they are. To say that they are a product of sin is so dehumanizing. It's
Hmm.
disgusting. Like
Hmm.
grow up, get a better theology. Like theology of the fall didn't exist until like basically uh basically Augustine. If we think Augustine is if we think Augustine is a church father, that's like saying that Bernie Sanders is a American founding father, because there's more time in between Jesus and Augustine than there was between the founding of the United States and Bernie Sanders. So
Wow.
like put that into perspective. Like the fall was not a original ideology. It's not found in Jewish understanding. Like get over it. There's actually a lot more you can learn about that entire story. But to think that somebody exists because of the product of the fall is incredibly dehumanizing, and some people got to grow up. Like come on. Um
So do you
but
think it
yeah,
for you, would it have been easier for you to have come to an identity of being gay, lesbian or bisexual than trans
at that point,
at that
yeah.
point? Yeah.
Um the problem was is I was pretty much solely into women. I mean, I'd been with my partner for 11 years at that point. Let's see. Yeah, 11 years. And like all my relationships have been with women. That's primarily who I'm attracted to. And like it wasn't until after I came out as trans that I was like, you know what, maybe let's actually think about this. And then it does turn out I actually am attracted to men and non-binary people and the whole spectrum. I'm what's called omnisexual,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little bit different than pansexual. Pansexual is like you're attracted to people regardless of gender. Omnisexual is more like the way that you're attracted to people changes depending on their gender, which is interesting. But yeah, like I'm attracted to men in a different way than I'm attracted to women. And then like people between that like very wide spectrum, depending on how they are and who they are. Like my attraction changes based off of I mean, I guess it's probably my perceived gender for them. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that might still be something that I need to work through. But yeah, I do find that my attraction is different depending on the person that I'm attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, like I had worked through um finally becoming affirming, and like my partner and I were talking about it quite a bit. And she kept saying asking me if there was something that I was like if I wasn't just a straight guy, which at the time I was like, no, I'm only into women. And so yeah, so like it was like she was trying to figure out what was actually going on with me. um
Mm-hmm.
Eventually she ended up asking me if I'd be interested in wanting to do drag. And
Mm.
I misheard her question, and I thought she was asking me if I would rather have been a woman. That was like the moment for me of like things clicking. And even at this point, like my exposure to trans people was so like limited that uh I didn't even know that what I was experiencing was gender dysphoria or like an experience of a trans person. Like we talked about it some, and I literally had to go and Google what I was feeling to for it to come and set and be like, well, I mean, yeah, I didn't give me the answer. It just gave me like
Sure.
people that were trans having similar experiences. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just like within one day of like my my partner asking that question, like it felt like all the pieces were coming together, and like these things that I had experienced like all the way from elementary school and like all throughout growing up, and like my position in, yeah, just like feeling not like feeling like I had to perform masculine is
Mm-hmm.
basically what it was. Like I had 30 plus years of performing masculinity and fighting against who I was.
Mm.
And to finally have those be put, like the puzzle pieces put into place, and like finally it made a picture. And it was just like such a big like aha moment of wow, my life actually makes a little bit of sense now. And
Mm.
so yeah, like for me, like it came on as a rush, like right away. It was, yeah, it was a lot at the time.
Right away after 30 years.
Yeah.
It was right
Well,
away.
yeah,
But yeah, but see,
but
isn't that amazing that we can hold things back for such a long time, but then when the
mhm,
insight happens, for you, when the egg cracked. For me, it was
mhm,
when, that aha, oh my God, I really am gay. It's like all of a sudden when then you cannot turn that off. You can't go
yeah.
back.
And like for me, a lot of it was not having language. Um,
Mm,
when you grow up in such a small community that is very queer phobic,
mm-hmm.
um, everything is put in the gay or normal like framework, and
Right.
there's no nuance or anything like that. And like I knew from as young as when the Lion King came out because Elton John did the music, and I had an aunt say uh that the music was wrong because Elton John was gay. Like that I was like 7 maybe. Um I don't remember exactly when it came out, but like I've known from such a young age
Mm-hmm.
that being gay is wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
like that got reinforced whenever I had a cousin come out as gay, and he lost complete connection with her family because
Mm-hmm.
our family disowned him. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
these things that kept coming up. And so the things that in me that felt feminine, I had to push down because feminine, if you're born male and feminine, you have feminine things, then you could be gay. And if you're gay, then that's wrong and sinful. And, people are going to beat you up on the playground, but also you could lose your family. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and whenever that's the only language you have for that framework, like one, that's terrifying.
Yes.
Um, but second, that means more expansive experiences. You have no way to process what you're feeling because you literally don't have a vocabulary to express them. So like when my egg cracked, and like I finally did some Google searches and finally had some language to put it together, my mind's like, oh, these are the words that we use. This is what you're feeling. And is like finally putting words to something that you've experienced for 30 plus years. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know of another like I don't know of another equivalent thing to talk about it. It's like your brain can't fully process an experience if there isn't language able to be associated with that experience. So it like it kind of just sits there, but it sits there in like a form of nothingness, I guess, like just
Mm-hmm.
kind of this void that can't be processed. And so whenever there is language and it comes forth, it's like, wow, that's been there the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and it's hard too when you don't have any other role models that have not been maligned. So,
Hmm.
of the people that you knew that came out and you saw bad things happening, that set the fear in motion, which shoved all insight and all processing back. And you didn't have
Hmm.
any other ways to look at other people. Like for me, even though there might have been some people on television, I mean, of course, there was no one on television when I came through. we didn't have any people that we knew that were gay and affirmed or gay and successful. It was all
Yeah.
the horror stories of how degenerate they were and how they would have sex
Hmm.
with animals and all these things, and those were the images we had. So the struggle is so pervasive, and it stops people from being able to move on with their lives in healthy ways. I believe that for me, I put a lot of roadblocks in my own way because I was feeling so much shame about what's going on inside of me that I couldn't even acknowledge at the time. I didn't know what it was. I just knew there had to be something wrong with me just
Hmm.
because of the messages that I got from that. And I didn't even know I was gay. I didn't even have an inkling that I was gay. But I took on the shame and I took on the
Hmm.
homophobia just
Hmm.
because all of my role models were telling me so.
Yeah. And yeah, I grew up, I mean, I was a 90s kid, I guess. So like the only experience you have with trans people is like Jerry Springer from the times when
Mm.
you stay home from school sick. Like that's like
Mm-hmm.
that's the extent of it.
Mm.
And that's not this is not a good framework of trying to understand like
Yeah.
human gender through Jerry Springer, which is designed for conflict and for dehumanization of
Right.
anyone that doesn't fit heteronormativity.
Well, and the same thing applies to any movies back in the day. Any movies
Hmm.
that you saw, the gay person was always the murderer or the degenerate. I mean, it
Yeah.
always came
Yeah.
out that way. And so it was ridiculous to try to, change that. You
Yeah.
can't
I
get a
think,
better picture when all the pictures you get make it look like it's such a horrible thing.
yeah. And I think the only movie that I know of that had a trans person in it was Ace Ventura. And
Uh-huh.
yeah. So
Yep.
that wasn't the also not the most
No.
positive.
Mm-mm.
No.
No. So where do we
Yeah.
go from here? Onward and upward, right?
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen for our society to start to get a clue?
I mean, that's such a big question
I know.
because uh
You're welcome.
yeah. I mean, I guess this kind of goes into the other topic that we had discussed
Mm-hmm.
talking about so there's the sense that liberalism is the opposite of conservatism, and that's simply not actually true. Both framing between liberalism and conservatism it was formulated essentially during the Enlightenment, whenever uh, whenever there was this push for understanding and thinking that progress towards European civilization was reaching essentially the peak of humanity, right? And then you ended up with two different splits. You ended up with liberals who were like, we know better, like we know better, and our way is better, and so and we're gonna keep progressing, and we're going to get there because we know what we're doing is right. And then there's the conservatives that are like, no, it's not about progression. It's about maintaining the our understandings that we already have. Um, but really, those two things are two sides of the same coin of the idea that the the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment European understanding of the world was in fact the peak of humanity. So it's like the truth is they're both steeped in colonialism and white supremacy. Like even Schleiermacher, for for those who don't know who Schleiermacher is, he's known as theologically known as the father of liberal theology. He was a very smart guy. He really did push a lot of new ideas that are used today. However, he actually believed and spoke. Well, no, maybe not spoke about. I know, but at least wrote in one place that he didn't believe miracles were needed anymore because uh, there's no other proof for the existence of God than European civilization. Like that was his understanding, and that's the father of liberal theology. And if we don't understand like how that is centered in a Eurocentric understanding and white supremacy, we're probably going to miss the rest of it, because that's honestly what we're dealing with. That means that other cultures with their understandings are somehow inferior, which the majority of other cultures actually do have a more diverse understanding of human gender and sexuality. I'm not saying that there's probably not a culture that has it all figured out in a right way or whatever. Like I know our culture doesn't. I still know that my understanding of gender is probably not going to be it's probably going to be thought about as like very like I don't know, product of her time type understanding, like a couple of 100 years from now. That's okay. But the idea that we had it figured out in a European context, the idea that a binary was this thing that was just known, that was part of our understanding of our religion, our tradition, and that the point was the point of humanity is reproduction, because we came like super focused on reproduction as being the point of humanity to push us forward. Like all of this really pushed into this narrative of gender binaries that were, instead of learning and progressing like liberalism says that it's about, it became about just imposing like European ideologies on the rest of the world, either with the smile like liberals or with a scowl like conservatives. But it's exactly the same thing. And so like we're not going to move forward as a society until we actually understand that our foundations in and of itself, speaking from a American like Western perspective, like are inherently broken. Our foundation for America is inherently broken because of white supremacy, because of colonialistic understandings, like the erasure of indigenous people. Like that wasn't just us getting something wrong. That was literally a result of our ideologies and theologies whenever it came to other people. Maybe America was founded primarily by Protestants. That doesn't mean Protestants like didn't follow through on what was that whenever the Pope said that you can conquer any land that's not Christian. Doctrine of discovery. That was basically Protestants' understanding with America also. Like we move into Georgia and just take like Cherokee land, and there's a lot of different different native groups in Georgia, but Cherokee was big. And it's okay because they aren't Christian. They need to become Christians and become more westernized and civilized. And so we put people in indigenous schools and erase their cultures and make them act like good white little kids, but then we still don't treat them like they're white because they're not, and we're super racist. Like this is our foundation. Like we get to where we are politically today, both Republican and Democrat, through the same start, and we have to recognize that our foundation is inherently corrupt. So I don't think that you blow everything up and start over, but like whenever it comes to figuring things out, we got to understand that we have to rebuild the foundation and rebuild up instead of trying to fix the things at the top. If we just fix things at the top, then it's not going to stop. You end up what's happened with affirmative action in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court just said no. Like they were able to do that. I support affirmative action. It was good. But at the same time, culturally, we never addressed the foundation that made affirmative action needed. So if we're just fixing the top without fixing the foundation, we're gonna end up with what we have in the Supreme Court right now, where rights are being taken away almost every week.
And the thing that worries me is that we would have to agree that starting over is what needs to happen. And even though we're not going to just throw it all out, but if we're saying that it's inherently broken and all political parties came from the same place, there has to be some common goal where we could come together at the table and say, as a group, without it being political or motivated that way, that we need to reconfigure and rethink who we are as a country and what we want.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way
I mean,
that sounds.
yeah, it sounds great. It's probably impossible, but the question you asked wasn't
Yeah.
what
Can we do it? It's what should we
can
do?
we do it? It's what should we do? So
Yeah. And you're
can,
correct.
can
You're correct.
can and should are two very different things.
Yeah. And I don't like to shit on anybody, but I do want us to be able to say it out loud that it's going to take that much of a monumental, because we get so frustrated that nothing ever gets better and things continue to go on. And why can't we fix it? Well, we can't fix it because everybody is afraid to let go of whatever power they have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no trust. Nobody trusts anybody to come to the table and not have an agenda, because everybody has always had an agenda. And especially for the marginalized folks, we don't get to have a seat at the table often. And when we do, because of numbers or because of whatever, we're dismissed. And so it's going to be a huge ongoing thing that we need to show up at the tables, whether we think we're going to be listened to it all or not. Just like right now, we continue to show up, speak up, stand up, be vocal, so that we don't get erased, because that's exactly they're trying to go back to the time where we didn't exist, even though we did and always have, but they didn't see us as much because we were all too afraid to be out. So now we have to make sure that we as a collective group not only vote for what we need and what we deserve, but we need to be as out as possible if we're safe enough to do so, because we have to be visible so that we can have the validity that we deserve.
Yeah. And that's where the difference between affirmation and solidarity comes in whenever we're talking about people that aren't necessarily part of the LGBTQ plus community. And this is a big call for especially mainline and progressive churches. Like, affirmation is great. I'm happy that you are inviting me to your table. I am happy that you have gender neutral bathrooms. I'm happy that you like have queer people in your leadership and serving on Sunday. But at the same time, I need you to do more, because if you're not going to, like, all of your affirmation is great and it's nice, but it's going to end with the rights of queer people being taken away. Whenever it comes to churches, we have to understand the power dynamics that have existed in our churches from basically the very beginning. Whenever mainline churches had to deal with whether or not they were going to let Black people join their churches, right? So that was like definitely in the it was actually before slavery ended, and this is why there are denominations that are predominantly Black, and there is what we call the Black church. It's because white churches didn't want Black people in their churches. Like, we got to recognize that, first of all. Second of all, some churches became okay with Black people being in their congregations, sitting amongst white people, which that was the thing, because white people didn't want Black people sitting like equal with them. So that's why there's balconies at some of these really old churches. Like, if you go to a church that's 200 years old and there's a balcony with seating up there, guess what? You're gonna have some history there that you gotta
unpack.
You gotta look at there. But like, even the churches that were as quote progressive as what they could be at the time, I don't know, who went as far as letting Black people sit amongst the white people in the congregation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still very few would let them be like in leadership or preach, but at the same time it's still not addressing the issue that there still wasn't ever going to be equality, because it was white people with power saying, hey, you can be here with me. And then we have that repeat whenever we're dealing with affirmation, and denominations have programs to become open and affirming, or whatever. Like the UMC has the Reconciliation Ministries, um, United Church of Christ, and Disciples of Christ. They have open and affirming. I think Lutheran or something has welcoming and affirming. It's still like these programs are great, and they are helping people become affirming, and that is a step, but it's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
uh
Mm-hmm.
because you still have to understand that these churches going through these programs, they're not talking about whether or not queer people are ontologically equal to white people, or yeah, actually I'm going to keep that. I know that I said white because I was just talking about race, but
Mm-hmm.
you know what, that's actually still relatively true. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um like Melissa Wilcox says, like the the white male cisgender heterosexual person is the standard, and then the further that you get away from that is it's seen as more sexualized and more deviant, which
Mm.
holds up. But so you have these churches that are like working through their affirmation process, and they're talking about theology and they're debating, and then it all comes to this accumulation of a vote where they either vote to become affirming or not become affirming. But we're not taking a step to say, what does that actually tell a queer person, that you have to vote on whether or not they are an equal human as the people that are already there?
Yeah.
And whenever that vote does come through to say we are going to become affirming, all they're saying is, yeah, we hold the power. You can hang out with us, but we still hold the power. There
Mm.
is still no ontological equality between straight people and queer people, between cisgender people and transgender people. It is still the people that hold the power allowing those who don't hold the power to show up in their same spaces. So
Mm.
this is where affirmation like does not live up. Affirmation is not solidarity. There's a lot of churches that are actually taking that step to move past affirmation, and that's great. And they're doing really great work. But the problem is we don't see that. Like we don't see that on like denomination levels. We don't see that in organizational levels. We'll see that within churches. Like there'll be groups within churches. There'll be churches themselves, but it's not an actual thing that is happening like nationwide or worldwide. Something that we really have to focus on is that move from affirmation to solidarity. A church that is unwilling to leave their church walls and go show up to the church capitol is not church, the state capitol is going to see queer people in their state lose their rights. They're probably gonna be nice and help queer people pack up as they have to flee the state. That is not solidarity. It's I don't you can't have an open table while you don't have an open state.
Mm.
That's just the truth of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like as queer people in the United States right now, we're honestly facing a style of fascism that is starting to rival a lot of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
A lot of things being said about queer people are word for word what were being said about queer people by Nazis. The truth of the matter is, Nazis targeted queer people.
Mm.
I believe that they targeted them before they even targeted Jews. The first book burning was books written on human sexuality and gender at one of the largest university like institutions that was studying it. The target started with protecting children from the queer contagion. Like that's literally things being said right now. That was things being said about queer people within Nazi Germany. The direction that we're going right now, especially with our Supreme Court, like our Supreme Court is literally like reversing
History.
rights, like almost with almost every week. And even this week, a judge in Tennessee cited the Dobbs decision and stated that Tennessee can ban gender affirming care because the founding fathers didn't have that in mind when they wrote the Constitution. So then Tennessee can ban it. Well, that should be a red flag for literally everybody, because the founding fathers had slavery in mind whenever they wrote the Constitution. So if that decision upholds, then there's no legal protection for non-white people like against slavery now, because when we're able to say that, oh, this wasn't the intention of the founding fathers, well, you know what? That's actually probably a good thing. Our founding fathers left in slavery. Our founding fathers carried out genocide against indigenous people. Like George Washington. Everybody loves George Washington, right? He was a great general and he helped us beat the British and was a great first president, right? Yeah, he carried out genocide on indigenous people. And the people that he carried out genocide on, you know what? They did have an understanding of a broader understanding of gender and sexuality. There are two-spirit people that still recognize or still identify with that tribe, because luckily George Washington wasn't as successful with genocide as in other areas, and he didn't in fact kill literally everyone, but still carried out genocide. Like, this is our history.
Yeah.
And we like conservatives like to point out like to say that liberals are revisionists because we don't want to have the Confederate flag flown, like, and call us revisionists. Are you serious? Like, your understanding of history ignores the plethora of travesties that people have carried out. And like, it's not that hard to recognize. Like my last name is Hargrove, right? Hargrove is actually a rather common name in the South. There's probably more black people than white people that have the last name Hargrove. Knowing history, that means that that the Hargrove name is associated with raping of slaves, because that's how you end up with a lot of ways how you end up with a white name, because Hargrove comes from Scotland. It's a Scottish name. And black people having that last name, it generally comes from the raping of slaves. I can date my family back to the Mayflower. Mayflower carried out genocide. Like, just because that's your history, that doesn't make you an awful person. Ignoring it so you can continue to be an awful person, yeah, that makes you an awful person. But the truth of the matter is, that is our history. We have to deal with it. We have to improve on it, or we're going to, like, those who don't study history are bound to repeat it. Yeah, we're in the middle of that right now, where we have a literal party like trying to work a new form of genocide and trying to work a new Nazi party.
So what does solidarity look like?
What solidarity looks like, and it can come in, like, obviously there can be different levels of solidarity. But like, practical things that a church can do to stand in solidarity, like put together a group from your church that is ready to go whenever legislation is about to be where there's going to be hearing, especially a public hearing, like at the state capitol. The how these things work with something like trans healthcare is they don't release that it's going to be talked about until like the night before or the day up. And the majority of activists have day jobs.
Work.
Like, or like I have kids, and you don't know when it's going to happen at the courthouse, right? So like I can't just go hang out at the courthouse to get my chance to be able to speak. But hey, if you have retired people in your church that actually want to stand in solidarity, put a group together, pay attention to stuff, read up on what is going on so you have the talking points and you can show up at these hearings and speak out and be like, hey, I am a member of such and such church. I am a Christian. I believe that this is against my Christian values, and use that type of language, because the people that are passing those laws are pointing to their religious understanding. I get that that's not separation of church and state, but we've not had that in politics and but speak out that that the loudest form of Christianity out there isn't the only form of Christianity. Be able to speak up with facts, be able to have stories. There's a good chance that there is a trans person in your congregation or a trans person associated with your congregation in some way. Have those stories. Like, be ready to speak out. Go and speak at these these protests, or go, actually not necessarily that as much. Go and be at the protest. Help out. Do things like volunteer to to bring water if like the protest is in the South, like we need water. But like showing up in ways that actually help, where to help others get their voices out, be able to speak whenever others aren't able to speak. Like you've got to do that. And you can't hide back and think, well, if I do this, people might think I'm trans. Well, that's you dealing with your own transphobia right there. Work on that. Recognize solidarity means being seen as somebody that is marginalized. If I'm marching in a pride parade, if you're going to be there, you need to be able to hold the trans flag just as high as me, whether you're trans or not, and be willing to be identified with me, recognizing that that is a place of vulnerability. Being trans in America right now puts a target on you.
Yes.
And being willing to have that target placed on you as well, like that's what solidarity is. So we need churches to actually step up and be willing to have that target placed on them just as much as it's already on trans people and queer people throughout our nation and throughout the world, honestly. It's not just America.
No.
It's just what we're facing in America, and that's where both of us live. And so it's yeah.
Because the thing is, and I've said this before, if you're at a church that's not affirming, but you say you're our ally, you have to be willing to speak up at your church and be a voice and have that glare come back at you the way we have it come back at us. I mean, you have to be willing to do that. If you say you're an ally, it's not just by word only, it's by action. And it's by taking the risks that show that, making sure that you understand who you're voting for. No matter which way you are persuaded to go, or what political party or no political party that you're affiliated with, what are the specific people going to do when they get into office, and being willing to break out of your party line if you are an ally, to really say, I will vote for somebody who's going to protect all people. And that's happening, I think, some. And I know that the Episcopal Church has a lot of social justice that they do. And I know my own priest has walked in picket lines and been out there advocating for us. But yet I agree with you that most churches will say that they are allies or they're affirming, but nobody goes, you know. So you're absolutely right. And I think that for kids coming up, even though the generation now is a lot clearer than we ever were, you're younger than me, but we had no education. We had no internet. We could not Google anything. And kids now are so much more aware, but that doesn't mean that they have the right information. And that doesn't mean that they have support, because they're still living in families that are very closed systems. So this conversation is definitely, one that we could have for years to come. Unfortunately, the change is going to be very slow. The one bright thing that I know is happening is that there has been enough awareness in the last several years that there is a problem. And there's awareness in some churches that being gay is not a sin. And that's the shift that we needed to get started. And we are far from done, but there's a shift that some churches, like the Episcopal Church, has made that shift, that it's not a sin, and that they do stand behind their word, and they do make it in the canon that gay people cannot be discriminated against, in the Episcopal Church. That is something that's happening now, and I want it just to continue and to get more, for sure, because not everybody is safe, for sure, and we don't know what the Supreme Court will do next, and we don't know what the next election is going to be like. So we're not safe.
No, we are not. I do want to say, though, if you are like in a leader in a church, and all of this work and effort has to be with the expectation that it doesn't matter if people go to your church because of it. Like, fight for people's rights, whether or not those people are going to show up at your church on Sunday.
Right.
And that's another issue that I've seen, is people wanting to be affirming, but with the expectation that queer people are going to show up in your church. I hate to break it to you, like, the church has a long ways to go to actually feel like queer people should be showing up. Like, and it might not be your specific church, but you're like, we can't pull a no true Scotsman fallacy here. Like, churches need to recognize the harm that all of Christianity has done,
right,
and recognize that reversing that is going to take a lot of time, and you probably aren't going to show up at the church capitol and then get a bunch of young queer people showing up at your church. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
But you still need to show up, because it's still the right thing to do.
Yes. I love the way you ended that. You're absolutely right. So, guys, thank you for listening, and thank you for taking the time out today to be with us. And I can tell you that Kalie will be showing up again on a panel that I'm getting together, because we're going to talk about, and we've kind of touched on it today, but we're going to talk about what is keeping our LGBTQ community away from church, and what can we do about it. And so that's going to be a panel that I'm putting together. I can't give you a date yet, because it's a panel. And that means that we have to coordinate several different schedules, but that's coming up, and I can't wait to do that. So Kalie, thank you. Thank you again for coming.
Of course.
You were a fan favorite from last time.
Awesome.
Yeah, you. So I do want to thank you. And listeners, I want to thank you for coming back each week, supporting, sharing, and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see more information and links to connect with Kalie, go to the Gay with God show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com. At that show page, empoweredmidge.podbean.com, you can access a new offering from Dr. Keith called Inlet Journey, your deconstruction guide to 7 key theological topics. It's not unusual for a person to begin questioning their faith of their past, especially when they have been abused by the church due to their sexual identity. And Christians have been deconstructing for thousands of years, trying to wrestle with their faith and how best to live it out. The problem is it can be a daunting path, and we may feel completely overwhelmed and just give up. The Reverend Father Dr. Keith Brown is an affirming Anglican priest with years of formal education, self-study, and practical experience around these very issues, and has put together a deconstruction guide course to help you better understand and wrestle with 7 key topics, including Bible, clobber verses, God, atonement, church, Lord's table, and baptism. In this course, you will be provided with practical journal questions to help you process these important topics for yourself. And as a bonus, you will receive a free group membership where you can ask questions, offer opinions, and make friends with other students in the course. And the best part, the affordable low price for this course. So check it out today at the empoweredmidge.podbean.com show page. And remember to check out the Facebook group, Gay with God, where we do a monthly Zoom group entitled My Faith Journey. If you need support or help with your own coming out or your faith journey, go to the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and see how you can connect with me. I will be at the Wild Goose Festival starting Thursday, and apparently so will Kalie. So we just found out. Yay.
Yeah.
So we're going.
I mean, it's going to be too late. It's going to be too late.
It's too
because
late.
This comes
You
out
will have missed it. But I'm
after.
telling you this because if you like this conversation and you would like to connect with more like-minded people, the Wild Goose Festival happens every year. So Google the Wild Goose Festival. You'll find lots of other people that do podcasts there, and you'll find lots of enlightened people who do not come from the same background, but that we all coexist. And it's very affirming and very loving at the Wild Goose. So thank you, everybody. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I do think that I will be recording my presentation because I'm presenting with the place I work at, the Center for Prophetic Imagination. And I'm at least going to be trying to record my presentation, and then that will be online. And so if you're not able to go to Wild Goose by the time this comes out, well, okay, let's be honest, I'm not going to get up by the Monday following Wild Goose, but shortly after probably you listen to this, my presentation should at least be up on as a video somewhere.
Okay. So, and if you can send me that link to your video, I'll put it on the show page of this conversation. And so that can be on the episode to promote it here too, if we can make that work out technologically.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, you are so welcome. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you. Stay tuned to see how you can become a member of the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.